Recycling as a system has become increasingly problematic. The truth of the matter is only a very small percentage of the plastic that's out in the consumer waste stream actually gets recycled at the end of the day.
It goes into the landfill, right?
At the best case scenario, it goes to the landfill. Worst case scenario, it ends up ending up in our water streams, in our ocean, in our environment. And in fact, so much of it is out there, and so much of it ends up breaking down into microplastics and ending up in our food stream, in our water stream, and it's ending up in our own bodies.
My guest today is California State Senator Ben Allen. He'll discuss the challenges the recycling industry is facing and his efforts on bringing the plastic industry and other producers to the table to solve the recycling problem. We also dive into Ben's experience as a senator and his personal motivation for public service.
After you get off of the campaign trail and you've heard about all these issues in your constituency, then you're up there fighting over things that never came up once during your campaign. But they're really hot issues there. Scope of practice battles, right? I mean, the podiatrists want to be able to work further up the leg, and the cosmetic surgeons are fighting against the plastic surgeons. I didn't even know there was a difference between them before I got into this, but they hate each other. There's just all these battles that are constantly at play.
I'm Siama Korami. Welcome to California Insider. Ben, it's great to have you on. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
You know, recycling is a big topic for Californians, and a lot of Californians care about the environment.
Yep.
And we are in the position to do that in California. A couple of years ago, we covered the fact that recycling in some cases was not happening because China was buying a lot of our recyclable materials.
Yeah.
And then they stopped buying sometime during the pandemic or right after the
Right
pandemic.
before, actually.
Right
yeah.
before the
yeah.
pandemic. And then things were going in the landfill.
Yeah.
What's the status?
Well, we're working on it. So China implemented this national sword policy, which said we don't want your junk anymore. Basically, so much of our material was going off there, and in many respects, we were kind of living a lie.
Were they buying it, or were they?
They were buying it, but in the end of the day, so much of it was not actually getting recycled. Partly because a lot of it was contaminated. I mean, we had mixed bales that were very hard to sort. And partly because there's not a very strong market for plastics recycling. If you really stop to think about it, I mean, the industry has pushed this idea that recycling is the solution. But if you really stop to think about it, it's actually, at least with regards to plastics, a very time and cost intensive process to sort the materials, make sure that they're sorted out into the right resin types, and then to go through the process of melting down and recreating a new product using that material. Especially when you compare it to how low plastic prices have been, virgin plastic, because of lower oil prices. It's so much easier and so much cheaper to just take the plastic base from the oil refining process and turn it into new product. And so recycling as a system has become increasingly problematic. What we've tried to do with the passage of SB 54 and some legislation before that is to say we're actually going to hold the industry accountable to its claims. You claim these products that you keep pushing out onto the market are recyclable. Well, you got to we're going to hold you responsible to that, to these aggressive rates of recycling. And if you can't meet those rates, then you need to transition toward a new type of product that's going to be more environmentally friendly. And that's the core concept behind this whole idea of extended producer responsibility, which is to say to producers, you know your product the best, you have the most control over your product, you know your market the best, you know your customers the best. We need you to take an active role in determining and in ensuring that the products that you keep pushing out into the market are not going to end up being a massive burden on both our environment and on ratepayers, which is what's been happening. I mean, so much of this stuff ends up in our waste stream, it ends up in our rivers and ocean, and it ends up filling up our landfills. And those additional costs associated with managing all that additional waste is being borne by regular people. We've seen rates continue to rise. And so through this legislation, we are finally holding these producers responsible and holding them accountable for the true costs associated with their products and actually inviting them to be part of the solution by creating responsibility on their part and accountability, which will then encourage them to move toward more sustainable alternatives.
We're covering California issues, as you know. If you want us to cover the stories that are impacting your day-to-day life in California, Reach out to me at siamak@californiainsider.com. You mentioned we were kind of sold a lie. Can you explain that?
I think over time, there are a lot of people in the plastics industry, which is a fossil fuel based. Let's remember, plastic is an oil product. A lot of people don't know this, but it's an oil product. And so the oil folks behind the plastics industry have been promoting the use of plastics over a long period of time. Plastics it's durable, it's cheap, it's strong, it's easy to use, it's convenient. So all of those things have been used to get plastics into more and more of daily life. And I remember, I'm not that old, I remember when they started introducing water bottles at the Dodger games. And I remember thinking to myself, why would someone want to pay money? I was a little kid. Why would someone want to pay money to pay for water? Because we used to have drinking fountains, and but of course now it's ubiquitous, right? Everyone has water bottles and plastic water bottles. It's just a thing people do. But it wasn't something that was a common thing back in the day. But that was an example of the plastics industry pushing this product out on people, recognizing that folks might find this attractive. And what they've done throughout all this time is tell the consumer, it's up to you to go recycle these products. Take these plastic products, feel good about continuing to buy plastics, put it in the recycling bin, and we're going to recycle. It'll get recycled. The truth of the matter is only a very small percentage of the plastic that's out in the consumer waste stream actually gets recycled at the end of the day. But people think that it's getting recycled.
When they put it into the bin.
They put it in the blue bin. In fact, in many ways, it actually makes the recycling system less efficient because so much plastic is being put into the recycling waste bins, and it then creates a whole new cost associated with sorting out the non-recyclable plastics or the stuff where there's no market for recycling. I mean, I did this myself. I love the newspaper, right? You're a newspaper guy. I literally still get the LA Times every day, and it comes in a plastic bag. Used to be that little plastic bag had a recycling symbol. By the way, I don't know why it needs to be in a plastic bag. It never rains, but there we are. It used to always have a little recycling symbol on the plastic bag, and I would dutifully separate it out, put it into the recycling bin, assuming it's got the recycling symbol, it's going to get recycled. Come to find out through my job that actually all these bags are gumming up the system. They're really hard to sort. They end up actually getting into a lot of the paper bales, which contaminate the paper bales. It's part of why one of the many reasons why China didn't want our stuff anymore, because all of this plastic film was getting stuck in other bales of other products and making it much harder. And
the thin plastic ones.
The little thin plastic film that would both gum up the machines, end up in the paper bales, end up in other bales, and make it harder for the whole system to work properly. And it's just one of many examples of how, for most consumers, they want to do the right thing. They've been told by the plastics industry that plastics are not a bad product for the environment. The more I got into this issue, the more I came to realize how much we are all paying, both environmentally and financially, to cover up to Band-Aid over the implications and the impacts of this massive surge of plastic products that have been pushed upon us by the plastics industry. And it's part of why I ended up getting involved in this issue and doing the legislation that I've done, which finally says to them, look, you got to be part of the solution. You got to be, we're going to hold you accountable to your recyclability claims. Just because something is technically recyclable, if it's not actually getting recycled under real world conditions, that doesn't help anybody. And so, if you're going to claim these things are recyclable, you've actually got to you got to make sure they're actually getting recycled. And in fact, if you're not finding a way to recycle these products, we got to transition to more sustainable alternatives.
What percentage of the things that we put into the bin is getting recycled? Is there a number on that?
Yeah, most plastics are not recycled. The one exception,
even the water bottles and
the water bottles are the one exception. They are recycled in California at about a 75% rate. By the way, it should be 95%. Because they are highly recyclable.
Even people put them in the bin.
Most of the stuff that gets in the bin ends up getting recycled. Of those water bottles. Most states, by the way, those water bottles are getting recycled at about a 35%, 25% rate. So much lower. We just happen to have a better system.
People put it into that bin. Or in other states.
A lot of states, they don't even have recycling bins. Because the recycling market is so weak that a lot of places where they don't have the kind of environmental ethos that we have, it makes no financial sense to even encourage people to recycle.
To redo
because the market is so weak. Even those plastic water bottles, are typically getting downcycled in the sense that they're being turned into something new, but it's usually something of lesser value. So that's one of the big problems we have is, it's all very good for something to be technically recyclable. It's all very good for it to be easily recyclable. But if there's this in a market to buy,
it doesn't make financial sense, right?
Then it doesn't make financial sense, and then that doesn't help either. So we shouldn't be continuing to promote the use of products on the grounds of recyclability if there's no real market for the end product of that item once it's been recycled.
Now, Ben, was there a time you figured this out, that you saw because this was shocking to me when I found out that a lot of these things might not be getting recycled.
This all started for me when I read a newspaper article about China's national sword policy. And I remember I sent it to my chief of staff, my chief environmental staffer. I said, we got to do something about this. This is a real problem. Because the LA Times was banging the drum about what a massive challenge this was going to be for everybody, especially given what a big revenue source it was. I mean, you say we did used to sell. I think the city of Los Angeles was making about $5 million a year off of selling this stuff. And now, then all of a sudden they're losing over $1 million a year just on trying to deal with the cost of getting it out, of putting it in the landfill, et cetera. So that article sent me down a rabbit hole. And I've toured so many recycling facilities and dumps and sorting facilities and landfills now. I've met with environmental leaders, with local governments, with waste haulers, with industry folks, plastics manufacturers, recyclers, and journalists. And I just started to learn about how incredibly dysfunctional the system was. And that's what led me toward the eventual passage of these bills, and really digging in deep, coming up with some systems. And that's what launched this massive negotiation that I helped to lead between local government, who of course are paying the price of the dysfunction.
Because of they are collecting all the trash.
Local government is they're the ones ultimately who are held responsible for waste management.
For all the waste management, okay.
Exactly. So and that's the thing. I mean, it is, while people say, by imposing new costs on the manufacturers, you may increase the cost of plastic. Well, to the extent that may be true, if that is a real issue, don't forget, right now the plastics manufacturers are pushing the cost associated with their cheap, low retail price products on the rest of us. It's the rest of us, it's our local governments
essentially the
that are picking up the
pay
tab.
for it.
It's the cities. And of course, what do? They pass it on to the ratepayers, us. And that's why we've seen our waste hauling rates continuing to rise. And so that's why cities were such an important part of the conversation. And quite frankly, they were the most important ally throughout the process, was the League of Cities, as we were trying to get these bills passed, because they're the ones who are at the front of the line in terms of the impact. They're the ones who have been able to see the problem up close and personal. And it was starting to constrain their budgets.
So what you're saying is that there are items made that are at a low cost, because they can be made at a low cost, like plastic items, packaging, all that. And then they are kind of promoted as recyclable, so people buy them, they use them, they put them in a recycling bin, but then to recycle them, it'll cost a fortune.
Yes.
That it doesn't make sense.
So then they don't get recycled. Why would anyone ever want to recycle something? Would they go through the hassle of sorting them and melting them down and turning them into something that they can't sell at a price that justifies all the expense associated with sorting? So it's partly why so many states have just given up on blue bins altogether.
And where does it go? It goes into the landfill, right?
It goes to the landfill. At the best case scenario, it goes to the landfill. Worst case scenario, it ends up ending up in our water streams, in our ocean, in our environment. And of course, we know that the amount of plastic out in the environment is shot up. And in fact, so much of it is out there, and so much of it ends up breaking down into microplastics and ending up in our food stream, in our water stream, and it's ending up in our own bodies. So they found plastics in placentas, in our skin, in our blood. And if you think about the fact that this is basically fossil fuel that is now in our bodies, every single one of us. You have about a credit card worth. There's all sorts of arguments about this.
That is the size of a credit card.
Well, who knows, right? But there's more than that in your body right now in plastic.
Does it come through the food, or does it?
Yeah. Food and water, typically, yeah. It's so hard to get rid of, right? It's not your body isn't designed to excrete this stuff.
Other states have given up on this, right?
Yes, because they're not willing to to do the hard work of holding the industry accountable, and the market has fallen out on the materials. What we're hoping to do with our legislation, of course, is by forcing the whole system to be more responsive to the realities that we've just been discussing, and by forcing the product manufacturers to actually take into account true recyclability, true compostability, and most importantly, waste reduction, source reduction, will both help to spur markets for circularity, so that those products that actually really can find an end use will find an end use that actually has.
So if they make them, it is really recyclable, and then there is a financial model for the recycling.
For the recycling, exactly. And we'll also create more of a financial market for alternatives that are more environmentally friendly. And one of the things I'm most proud of with this bill having passed is that I'm now hearing from some of those young, exciting California innovators that have been out there, banging their head against the wall, trying to get the Walmarts and the Targets and the Costcos of the world to call them back because they had these really cool, environmentally friendly alternatives to plastic. They're finally getting calls back. There's a guy out there, I'll give you one example, who has created an alternative to styrofoam. Styrofoam, if you think about it, what is styrofoam there for? It's basically, in most cases, it's there to help you get your TV from Best Buy to your house without getting cracked or dinged. It's literally just a padding. I mean, you could wrap that TV in a blanket. I mean, it would probably do the same thing, but it's just this cheap oil-based product that pads your stuff. Well, this guy came up with an alternative that's made up of shrimp shells and cornstarch and vinegar, and it does exactly the same job of providing padding to protect appliances. TVs, appliances.
Yeah.
And unlike styrofoam, you could take those natural alternative foam, throw it off the Santa Monica Pier, and it would be completely biodegraded with no negative environmental impact within about 15 years. No toxins, it's all natural ingredients. Whereas styrofoam, as we know, breaks up into tiny pieces, it gets into the fish, it gets into the bloodstream, now all of a sudden it's in our bodies and in our water stream, and impacting our environment. So there are really great folks out there that have been coming up with the alternatives to these plastic products.
What's the cost? Is there a cost model? That's why they don't accept them? Is there a big discrepancy?
It's like so many things. You don't make the change unless you have to. I mean, I'll give you one example. The car companies, for example, didn't want the California air quality regulators to tell them that they had to switch toward more safe, lower polluting emissions technology in their automobiles. But it got to a point where kids were growing up with half of the lung capacity in South LA versus rural parts of the country. We couldn't even see the Hollywood sign because the smog was so bad. So the regulator said, you got to switch to these lower burning technologies. They kicked and screamed, but they did it. And now we've got much cleaner burning cars, even though there's many more cars on the road, and we can actually see the Hollywood sign, even though there's a lot more traffic than there was in the 70s. When you say what's the cost, you got to take into account the total cost, right? It's not, so yes, the imposition of that new technology did lead to a marginal increase in the cost of automobile purchases. However, what's the cost associated with all the healthcare impacts of the pollution that was caused by those cars? Similarly, what are the costs that we're currently bearing as ratepayers or as cities to handle the influx of plastic waste? That's all money that's coming out of our city coffers. That means that they have less money for senior programs and school programs and parks and transportation. I mean, from my perspective, you've had these plastics manufacturers that have basically been freeloading off of the rest of us. It's not that there's not a cost associated with these products. It's just that they're not paying for the cost. We are. And it's just not fair. And so that's ultimately what this is about. It's about saying to them, look, you've got to play a part in helping us to come up with solutions here. You've got to come up with more environmentally friendly alternatives. And we will all benefit as a result.
If you like California Insider and you like to know what's going on in California, make sure to check out Epoch Times. This is a newspaper that started by a group of Chinese Americans because of human rights abuses in China, and now is starting to grow here. Make sure to go to the Epoch Times website and check out the California section, where you can get a lot of fresh perspectives on what's going on in California. Now let's go back to the interview. Is there a model for that where people can do products that you can actually recycle and have benefits? Or can that industry, the ones that are making plastic bags, change in a way where they can make it degradable?
Well, this is the beauty of what we did, right? I mean, this is actually a free market model that had industry at the table negotiating, right? So they were part of the negotiations. I mean, ultimately, we say to them, here are the rules. You got to meet these rates for circularity, or you got to find another product over a runway of time. And industry, you know your products better, you know your market better, you know the technology the best. Figure it out. We all know that there are alternatives out there. They will either turn to those alternatives or they will find a way to make their current product more environmental friendly. And that process is underway. And it's part of why those innovators that I was telling you about, like the styrofoam alternatives guy, is getting the call back. Because all of a sudden these businesses are actually interested in checking out their product. People they don't change unless they have to most of the time, especially in business, because they've got these tight margins and they have a system that's always been run a certain way and they just don't have any incentive to change unless they have to. I mean, there was an example of some company that changed it's the resin type on its detergent bottle. Just for, I think, some marginal pricing benefit, maybe it was some aesthetic thing. And that rendered the item, it used to be totally recyclable, now it's not recyclable. But again, there was no incentive for them to even think about recyclability when they were pushing these products out. And that's what we're addressing with this legislation.
Now, Ben, do you think this kind of legislation will have an impact globally? Because one of the things that California does, sometimes we are doing bigger things, but then does it have an impact on the rest of?
I said every step of the way during the process of this legislation making its way through the legislature, if this doesn't impact national and indeed global markets, we won't be doing our job. I will have considered this a failure. Now, literally today, I just came. I was late because I was meeting with the Consul General from Finland, and we were talking about this very issue. And there's so much interest in cooperation between the Nordic countries and California on this topic, as we help those businesses and innovators that are coming up with better alternatives. So just like with cars, right? When California made that decision to force the industry to lower emissions and lower the smog, that actually sent ripples around the world because it created the imperative for the car companies to come up with better technologies here. So then all of a sudden it's almost like the solar stuff, right? I mean, it used to be solar was very expensive. We required it, and so the price plummeted. So now other countries say, wait a minute, you can't tell me anymore that you can't do this. You're doing it already, and you're doing it successfully in California. So we want to impose the same emission standards. Similarly, we prove the model here. It will give an opportunity to other parts of the country and other parts of the world to say to the plastics manufacturers, we want less crap, we want less waste, trash that's flooding our landfills. We know you can do better. You're doing it there. We want you to do it here too. And then it becomes a kind of a virtuous cycle where they are able to take advantage and their environment is able to take advantage of the innovation that we've done here. And hopefully California businesses and innovators will be able to profit from that, quite frankly, as the frontline fighters and innovators in this space.
Now, for those of us that may not know about the landfills, you have visited a lot of them, right?
Yeah.
How much volume is coming in and how much space do they have?
Massive amounts. I mean, they're dirty. They create a ton of truck traffic. There's a lot of waste that blows off of them. There's air pollutant issues. I mean, we've got a massive underground fire that's happening up in Chiquita Canyon right now, and people who live nearby are getting headaches, and there's cancer. I mean, there's all sorts of health impacts. There was a big battle recently about the possible creation of a new landfill down in San Diego County, and a lot of people not wanting one near where they live or not wanting to see landfills expand. Landfills are really not, they're not pleasant places. They pollute. We just shove all this crap into the ground.
And we keep digging and shoving more.
Exactly. And then literally, right now, as we speak, there is an active fire that is burning its way through. Because remember, it's just this mix of of fuel and plastic and paper and phosphate and junk. I mean, just everything you can imagine. I mean, refrigerators. I mean, just everything just thrown together and pushed together, and it often heats up. And there's chemicals in there, and there's liquid, and there's. It's very hard to manage. As much as they say that they do everything they can to ensure that this stuff doesn't leach into the ground, there have been unfortunate examples where it has, which then implicates our groundwater system. And again, right now, I mean, I encourage you. Your next interview ought to be with Pilar Schiavo, who's my colleague in the state assembly, who represents the Northwest San Fernando Valley, who just recently stayed with some of her constituents who live right by Chiquita Canyon, this beautiful neighborhood, and so many of them are now having all sorts of health problems because of this fire that they can't get under control that's deep within the landfill.
Which is burning all that material that is
underground,
a mixture of underground.
And then it's getting into everyone's bodies, and there's been cancer and all sorts of problems.
Now you're working outside of plastic. You're working on some other items that are going on the landfill. How many items are there, and what's?
So we're trying to expand this extended producer responsibility model to cover lots of other kinds of products: textiles, food, EV, electric vehicle batteries. Solar panels. There's work underway on a whole range of mattresses and carpet. We need to redo those plans. So there's a lot of products out there. I mean, nearly every product, quite frankly, we could do a better job of managing. The traditional capitalist model has just put all of the incentive on keeping the initial price low for the sale of a product without taking into account the life management, the life cycle. And so the whole concept of extended producer responsibility is to build the total cost of the life cycle of a product into the economic model. First of all, so that our ratepayers, our cities, and our citizens are being treated more fairly in this grand scheme, but that also the product manufacturers do more to take into account and design a system, both the actual product design, but then the distribution chain design, to better ensure a more responsible management of the product at the end of life.
Do you think California, with the model that you guys are introducing, is this a unique model? Are we the first?
Well, some aspects of it are unique. I mean, we're the first to require source reduction, for example, to force the industry to just think about putting less crap out onto the market. But it's very much inspired by and in conversation with other jurisdictions. British Columbia, highest among them probably, but also Ontario and Quebec. In the United States, Oregon and Washington and Maine, and several northeastern states. Globally, the UK and the Scandinavian countries. Japan's got some good programs in place. So it's definitely a part of a broader global conversation. I will say though, my friend was at the International Conference on Oceans in Portugal when the announcement was made that the governor had signed our bill. And literally, everyone started getting an alert about it on their phones, and the whole conference erupted in applause because there was a recognition of how important this was globally. So it is absolutely part of a global conversation and inspired by other laws from different parts of the world. But we also are we're trying to push forward the broader conversation and encourage others to be part of it. And then, by the way, others will. I mean, there was, I think, Vermont. Vermont and Maine, we failed to pass the bill, then they stepped up and passed a bill, and then our bill passed and it was better than theirs. So we're part of, as I say, it's a virtuous cycle, a virtuous conversation between various jurisdictions as we try to outdo each other, but in so doing, help each other. And it's a good thing. It's a good thing. I'm proud of it.
Now, one other thing, you mentioned forcing the industry, but you, at the same time, you're saying you're bringing the industry to the table, the people that are. Is there a point that they may not want to come to the table, or do you think the California market is big enough and the cost is not that big for them to participate?
Well, look, they will come to the table if they have to come to the table. they will also fight us tooth and nail if they don't believe that what we're doing is reasonable. And I guess our job was to find a model that was going to meet our needs as a society, as an environment, as ratepayers, while also not proposing something that they simply couldn't do, or they couldn't.
They would leave, like.
Yeah, and it had to be economically viable. It had to be logistically viable. And it's part of why, in the end of the day, we really focus on giving them, like putting them in the driver's seat. We don't have some bureaucrat in Sacramento telling them exactly what to do. They create their own producer responsibility organizations as industry. Now, they are held accountable to these ambitious rates and dates for circularity, for recyclability, for compostability, for source reduction, but they ultimately have both the responsibility, but also the opportunity
to figure it out.
And that's why it is, as opposed to a command and control system where some bureaucrat's telling them what to do and how to do it. And they appreciated that. I mean, they appreciated the fact that they were at the heart of the plan for finding the solutions.
Ben, do you have any other thoughts for our audience?
Yeah, I just think the more people can educate themselves about the way the system works. I know this is like a crazy idea, but go visit your local recycling center or landfill. I know it sounds like not a fun thing to do, but actually it's really interesting. It's really interesting.
And people can visit them? Is it okay?
You have to make arrangements, but typically it's not that hard. And I can certainly help people with this if they want. We've helped different political clubs or organizations plan trips to see. And I know that our recycling center in Santa Monica, they have school groups come and see. Because I think when you go to one of these places and you just see the impact of our collective consumer behavior and our throw out behavior, it leaves an impression on you. It really helps you grapple with what role you've helped to play in this problem that we have. Because it's so easy to just put your stuff in these bins and they magically disappear and you never have to think about it again. We've done such a good job of just taking care of this problem and pulling it out of your sight, out of mind. But these products don't just magically disappear. They actually go somewhere. And there's a lot of problems associated with it. And so just the more people can educate themselves, even if you don't want to go to one of these sites, learn about it, read about it. There are some wonderful videos and there's some wonderful documentary films that have been made on this topic too. And I can give you a list that people ought to watch because it's a difficult and important topic that merits. It's not rocket science. It's not that complicated, but it's complicated enough that people need to spend a few minutes on getting their head around it.
You have to see it, kind of. You have to see it to understand.
It really helps. It really helps.
You are a senator. You're a state senator in California. You're serving about 1 million people, right?
That's right. Yep.
And how did you get into this?
I've been interested in public service since I was a little kid. I like the work. It's meaningful. It's important. It's eclectic. It's diverse. As we were discussing, one of the things that's really fun about the job is that every day I get to work on 15 new things. I mean, today alone, I was working on an insurance issue, talking about environmental policy, talking about higher education. I mean, every day there's a strange and wonderful mix of issues that you get to work on. I suppose it was a real desire to get to do this kind of work on policy. And then, of course, you have to be willing to put yourself forward, which is a scary thing to do. And I had been serving on the school board in Santa Monica, Malibu, when this position opened up. I was teaching at UCLA Law School and working as a lawyer in town. And so I think when the opportunity presented itself for me to run for this position, I guess I'd been thinking about and writing and teaching state policy issues for some time. And it was a very short time window to decide whether to do it or not. I mean, because our congressman decided very last minute to not run for re-election. So our state senator, whose job I now have, jumped in for the congressional race instead of running for re-election. And maybe I'd like to say if I had more time, maybe I would have decided to do it. But I really had to decide in a matter of days. And I figured, you know what, this will be a few months till the primary. If I get past the primary, that's a good thing. If not, I get my life back. I'll go doing what I'm doing. Maybe I'll teach a class about the experience. And in one very, very, very difficult year later, I emerged victorious and ultimately won this election. But it was a really wild experience running for office and at this level. And but very fulfilling. I met incredible people, and it's been a great experience ever since. I've been 10 years in the job. which is hard to even believe. It just feels like yesterday when I was first running. And it's given me the chance to work on so many important issues. We were talking about recycling earlier. I've delved into environmental policy, but also education policy and campaign finance reform, political reform, elections policy, health issues, homelessness, housing, transportation. The list goes on and on and on. And it's been a truly an honor and very fulfilling to do this work.
You mentioned 1 year of difficult time. How was it difficult?
Oh, it's relentless. When you run, there was no time for a break. It doesn't matter how well you feel that day. It doesn't matter how little sleep you got the night before. You just have to be. It's your one opportunity when you're running in a district of 1 million people, and certainly at a higher level. It's typically the one chance. Whoever you're meeting with that day, whatever group you're talking to, that's going to be their one real.
There's no
interaction
coming
with
back.
You.
Yeah, just
one. And so it's your one opportunity to make a good impression upon them, to hear them, to make them feel good about you being their representative, and looking out for them, and looking out for their community and their interests. And so you just have to be on. You have to be on. And of course you're up against really talented people who want the job just as much as you do want it. And it's a truly zero-sum game. This is not. It's not like the Olympics where you get gold, you get a medal even if you come in third. If one person wins the position and everybody else doesn't, and so and I was up against some really talented, excellent people. Some really good people who were running for the position as well, and so I had to differentiate myself. So it was hard. It was exhausting, but it was fun too. It was fun in its own way. I think part of how you get through a year like that is to enjoy aspects of it, is to make sure you extract from the experience all of the excitement associated with learning new things and meeting new people and testing yourself, putting yourself in these uncomfortable positions where you're having to come up with positions on things that maybe you hadn't thought about very much before.
Did you have to come up with positions on the spot, or did you have to just come up?
That's a good question. I wouldn't come up with things. I tried to read as much as I could. I tried to have as many informative conversations as I could. So I tried to prepare as best I could before every interview and every debate and every discussion and meeting I had. But sure, sometimes, I would usually say, here's what I think about what you've just asked me. I want a little bit more time to understand it and get to know it better, maybe read a little bit more, but here's my initial feeling. And I'll let you know, and I'd love you to give me your thoughts. And so that was typically what I would do, as opposed to just taking some kind of rock hard position on an issue without.
What was the range of these issues? Did you have some? Would you mind sharing some of them that was difficult to think about?
Everything. Development politics, the CEQA, regulation, taxation, school finance, health issues. How do we structure the health system? What do we do about homeless? Civil liberties questions, policing, budgetary priorities, equity and racial issues, schooling questions, curricular questions, labor questions. And all these things are things you ultimately have to vote on. So there's a reason why they're asking you about your positions, because in the end of the day, you're going to be casting votes that really impact the direction of the state on all of these different matters. So they have a right to know what your feelings and thoughts are. You don't, as I say, you don't have to have a perfectly baked answer, but they do expect you to grapple and research and think and read about these things. And there's probably about 500 different topics that you really need to get to know. And what makes it extra hard is that they're complicated. By the way, I didn't even get into energy. That's a whole other subject that I've gotten to learn a lot about. But so in order to do this job well, you really have to be a voracious and energetic learner and thinker and listener. And so it's part of what makes the job hard, but it's part of what makes it fun and challenging.
Before we continue, we would like to thank Shen Yun for sponsoring this channel. I lived in China for 2 years and experienced 2 different Chinas. One is the China we know now, unfortunately with communism. And the other is ancient Chinese culture with 5,000 years of history, strong values, ethics and morality that has been lost. Shen Yun Performing Arts is reviving this 5,000 years of Chinese traditional culture. It takes you back in time to magical world of ancient China, with a unique blend of brilliant dancing, beautiful costumes, and legends coming to life. Go to shenyun.com to find out the schedule and theater information. It's a lifetime experience you don't want to miss.
Just so inspiring. It makes me want to go dance.
Breathtaking. I was very impressed.
I'm taking my program and I'm going to mention it on the news because I think it's a great performance and people should see it.
What I loved about the show was the authenticity of it. It was taking me on a journey.
Exceptional. The technique involved, that the thousands of hours of training.
People just float. Everything was exact, and then they worked to the exact moment, and it was beautiful.
You go away feeling with a smile in your heart from it.
Have to come. Life-changing.
Make sure you see it. Make sure you see it.
Don't wait. Get your tickets now.
And what was it like when you got started?
Well, they always say, when you first get up there, it's like drinking out of a fire hose. You've got so many people to meet. You got to learn about the culture and the system up there. And it doesn't mean you have to accept everything about the culture and the system up there, but you have to learn about it at least so you can navigate within the system there. There's a whole world of people in Sacramento that are different, and it's a whole world of issues. So after you get off of the campaign trail, and you've heard about all these issues in your constituency, then you're up there fighting over things that never came up once during your campaign. But they're really hot issues there. Scope of practice battles, right? I mean, the podiatrists want to be able to work further up the leg, and the cosmetic surgeons are fighting against the plastic surgeons. I didn't even know there was a difference between them before I got into this, but they hate each other, right? They're just in massive battles over licensing, and then you've got the doctors are fighting against the hospitals and the insurance industry and the nurses. I mean, everyone's got different. The optometrists are fighting against the ophthalmologists, but all of them lock arms to fight against the trial lawyers, right? So there's just all these battles that are constantly at play up there, and you just have to do your best to listen to everybody, hear them out, learn about why people feel as strongly as they do, and then try to come up with some wise public policy. And so it's yeah, as I say, drinking out of a fire hose, and then over time you have to build a staff. You figure out what committees you want to serve on. You figure out what sort of bills you want to run. What do you want to prioritize? What do you want to work on? How do you want to spend your time? How do you want to craft a schedule? How do you deal with just a shock to your system by now you have to live in two cities because you got to have a place in Sacramento and a place in LA. So that you got that whole dynamic of back and forth and over time you get used to it. You hit your stride. Hopefully you build a good staff that will help you both in the district and also in Sacramento that help you navigate all of this stuff. And over time you find your niche and you find where you're going to really play ball, and where one of the challenges, you can't possibly work on every issue. So one of the things that you have to do is figure out who do I trust on these issues that I'm not going to spend as much time on. Maybe it's another senator, another assembly member. Maybe it's an organization or a staffer. There are certain topics that I say, hey, colleague, I trust you on this topic. I may disagree with you on one or two things, but in general, I think you got a good head on your shoulders, and so you're going to work on that, and I'll back you up. I'll ask you some questions, but I'll generally support you. So that's another thing you have to do too. Who do you trust? And then, of course, what's interesting is, of course, you'll never agree with everybody on everything. So part of it is, even with your closest friends and allies, where do you really agree with them? Where do you maybe disagree with them? And understanding all those contours as well.
Is it worth it? All this is a lot of work.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think a lot of it depends on your personality and where you find fulfillment. Certainly, there's a sacrifice, there's a toll, and I'll tell you, I mean, I feel really fortunate that my wife and I got together during the campaign, so we never knew anything different. Something like 7 or 8 of the people that entered into the legislature when I entered into the legislature, within about 4 years, their relationships had broken up. In some cases, it was because they were cheating, but in other cases, it was just because the shock to the system was so hard. They were living together, and then all of a sudden they were apart half the time, and they just drew apart. Or even when they were home, they were working all the time, and they were running out to events. I talk to politicians all the time who raise kids, or I talk to kids of politicians. I'm always interested in meeting people whose parents were in politics because I want desperately to know, like how what suggestions do you have for me to raise two healthy, happy, well-adjusted kids? Because I've got two children now who've been born since I got elected. And how do I craft a life for myself that does justice to my work and to my constituents and my job, and also to my family? As I am trying to balance all of the challenges of living in two places and being away a lot and being at events and all that. So when I first got in, I would go to everything, and I've had to. I can't be everywhere in the way that I was when I first started because I have kids now, and I really care a lot about making sure I'm there for them. Of course, the good news is, being so involved so early, people got to know me. I could kind of. People knew who I was, and they know how to. Just because I don't necessarily show up at every single event now, they still know who I am. They still know they can call me, they can reach out to me, and we're going to be able to work well together. But that's really hard if you start in office with little kids, because you're really torn. And I talk to politicians, former politicians, about how a lot of regret, quite frankly, that they have about all the time they spent outside of the house, away from their families, at critical moments when their kids were missing those games, missing those experiences. So I'm coaching my son's soccer team. I'm really, and that causes some consternation sometimes with my team because I've got to, sometimes I got to cancel things that I would otherwise go to because I'm going to be at practice or I'm going to be at the game. But that's just a commitment that I've made to myself in some respects, to be there for him and show him that I'm really present for him in spite of this very busy job.
You have a lot of people you guys are serving. And do people recognize you in the street or come to you and ask you about things? Does that happen?
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, it's funny. I like, we're not as well known as people in the federal government. I like to say that I'm sort of a V-level celebrity. Yes, I do run into people in district. Now in Sacramento, there's a few blocks right around the Capitol where I may be a D-level celebrity.
Our reporters know you, and they're
reporters or other or lobbyists or advocates or other staff. Then the California Democratic Convention, that's where they really that's where I feel more like a B-plus celebrity. That's where people really there are a lot of political junkies there and who love this stuff and know all the legislators, and they'll come up to you and tell you about some bill that you voted on that they either like what you did or they didn't like. But it's not like being the governor or being a U.S. senator or something like that. Those folks are working at a different level. I mean, I do enjoy a certain degree of privacy in this job that I would not have if I were at that level. And there's something nice about that, because I do think for some of those folks, it really becomes hard to live your life because you can't go anywhere without getting, having folks. And look, and of course, nobody forced you to do this, right? I mean, it's ultimately you have to, I mean, when people recognize me on the street or in the airport, I usually like it. I mean, it's like I like talking about this stuff with people, unless they want to yell at me. But even then, I kind of find it fun because,
Does that happen?
Yeah, sometimes. And look, most of the time, especially if you go back and forth with them with a smile and with respect, they'll appreciate it. From my perspective, I mean, I like this stuff. I like talking about public policy, and I like grappling with these things.
So do they come up to you with the issues? They want to talk to you about certain issues, or do they talk to you about your votes, or? Everything in it. Usually they're not expecting to see you. So oh hey, Senator Allen, great job, or oh man, you got to lower my taxes, or go tell Kamala to do da da da. You get a lot of that too. People will kind of give you their thoughts or advice about what's happening at the national level, as though I have a hotline to the Nancy Pelosi, and so that's also funny. Do
too.
people mix the national and the
all
state?
the time? Good friends. They'll say, "Oh, are you in Washington this week?" No, I'm not in Washington. I go to Sacramento. I go to Washington every once in a while, but my job's in Sacramento. So it's amazing how I think because I'm called a senator, they sometimes think, they sometimes think I'm going to Washington. But again, it's an opportunity to have a little conversation about civics and federalism. And it's fun. I mean, look, I got to say, in many respects, it's a better job in the legislature than in Congress. Congress is so divided, so partisan. We were talking earlier about one of my Republican colleagues who and we're friendly. We've worked well together on a number of issues. I like that dynamic in Sacramento. It just seems like so much of the world in Washington is focused on fighting and partisanship, and just seeing something wild to get yourself on TV. Whereas we're actually able to get a lot of stuff done, and with real implication. And we were talking about plastics earlier and environmental policy. We're the 5th largest economy in the world as a state. We've got relative coherence, cohesion to our political system. So when we take action on an environmental issue or on a lot of different things, it really does have global impact. And there's something really exciting about that, to be able to get something done that's meaningful and know that you've actually left a mark that doesn't just have an impact on your local community or even just your state, but it really can move markets nationally and globally. And there's something really fulfilling about that.
In terms of people getting involved in public service, do you recommend that to younger people? And if you do, why?
Yeah, no, look, absolutely. I think we need young people involved in the system, getting involved. It's fulfilling, it's interesting, it's eclectic, it's meaningful. I would say, of course, there's lots of different ways to get involved. Obviously running for office is one way, and it's a very important way, and we need good people to run for office. But if that's not for you, don't think that that's the only way to be involved in the system. And I have a great team of people that work for me. So you can work for a politician at any level. You can work for an advocacy organization if there's a topic that you really care a lot about. I mean, some of the people who run the various advocacy organizations have more power than the elected officials because they have the base, the money, the strength of their arguments on whatever topic they focus on. So that's another way to get involved. You can get involved with campaigns and help to get people elected that you like. You can get involved in fundraising for people that you like. You can go work for the government, not necessarily for a politician, but for an agency or for a department at any level. If you don't want to work in politics and government, you can still get involved. Politicians need help. They need help fundraising. They need help with policy ideas. There's ways that you can volunteer. There's ways you can create organizations and clubs and get involved with groups that are out there advocating from the side or engaged. There are lots of different ways to get involved. And I guess I would say to younger folks, a lot of people see the government as something that's far away, that's on television, that's distant from them. And I would just say that the government, politics, are filled with real people. And don't be afraid of showing up and asking questions and getting involved. And when I was in college, I reached out to the county supervisor, Zev Yaroslavsky, who was our supervisor. When I was going to college in the East Coast, I sent him a letter, said, "Hey, I'd love to come intern for you." I got a job interning with him for the summer. That opened up a world to me as a younger person, working on health policy for the county. And then next thing you know, we became good friends. He became a major supporter of mine. I mean, his endorsement when I ran for both the school board and for this position became really important for me in getting elected. And that was just because I took the opportunity to reach out to him and ask for an internship. So all those kinds of things can really help to inspire you. And even if you don't end up wanting to be in the public sector, it's worth spending a little bit of time in the public sector. I mean, you can intern. I like when I meet with students, I tell them, if you go to the university, most universities, they'll have, the University of California, for example, has a center in Sacramento and in Washington. You can go take classes there. You can go, as you also intern for elected officials or government agencies. It's a great way to get a window into how our government works. No matter what you do, understanding the government, understanding public policy, understanding the public sector can only be helpful to your career and your philosophy and outlook on life.
California State Senator Ben Allen, it was great to have you on California Insider.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you so much.